Well, here I am again, and I wondered whether I would or wouldn't because I'm having a hot flush. I'm sure I don't need to explain what that is. It doesn't actually seem too bad. I've had a good wipe down. But I've opened the windows and the door, and hopefully the temperature's going to drop. Well, one of the reasons people, or one of the things that people often say to those of us who are deeply affected by something that happened to us in the past, that we're still carrying around and it's still having its effect, is they say, oh, forget the past, put it in the past, leave it in the past, don't look at the past. It's all gone. And you know, that just isn't true. Those of us who experienced real traumas as we were growing up, whether it was one trauma or two traumas or just trauma after trauma, as it was for some of us, it might as well have just been yesterday for the effect that it has when it hasn't been looked at and dealt with and remembered. But more importantly, the feelings that are attached to these events, that is what has to be excised from us. And the only way we can do that is by allowing ourselves to go through it. Unfortunately, what tends to happen, or can happen, is that when we begin to delve into it and unpick the scab and start going through the layers of it, we of course experience a great deal of pain. And other people don't understand what this pain is. They don't understand what happened because they keep thinking of something present in the moment that has happened to account for such grief. They don't understand that you can be experiencing and exhibiting such grief for stuff that happened 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. Do you know, one of the most moving experiences I ever had was having a 70-odd-year-old woman sitting in front of me and telling me that her father used to rape her from a very young age. And I was the first person that this woman had ever told in the whole of her life. Can you imagine that? She carried it all those years. Anyway, unfortunately what can happen is that people like doctors can intervene and medicate you. Or maybe you yourself run scared to the doctor and ask for medication. In my experience, because it's happened to me many times, which is one of the reasons why my recovery took so long, I was medicated and all that it did was put the bottle stopper back in. And I came to understand that that really is what people wanted you to do. They couldn't cope, not even the professionals, the so-called professionals who supposedly understood. They didn't understand at all. In fact, most of them didn't think that what happened to me as a child was of any importance whatsoever. I was just an adult who was fucked in the mind, and that didn't have a cause as far as they were concerned. It was a physical malfunctioning of my brain. So of course when the grief and the fear and the anxiety used to come up, they would medicate me. You know, I've been in a situation of not being able to leave the ward that I was on and being forced to take medication, having it injected into me because I refused to swallow it. I won't ever forget those days, because they were trauma in itself. All they did was add to it. Of course, at the time I didn't understand that, and I didn't know that. I almost did sink in those days, and I tried to conform. I tried to accept what they were telling me, that I was just a mentally ill person and I was going to be like this all of my life, and that my fears and pain were nothing but fantasy. It was a truly dreadful experience. You know, and I saw other patients. I'll never forget, I saw this woman. Now, to me she was old, but you have to bear in mind that I was just in my teens. So, you know, it's quite possible that this lady was only in her 40s. But this lady didn't communicate at all. She just sat in a chair. And anyway, 4 nurses came along and they grabbed hold of her and they forced medication into her. And they forced it into her mouth and poured liquid down her mouth. And there didn't seem to be any care at all. Didn't seem to be any compassion on the faces of the nurses holding her down. And that's, I have to say, one of the things that I remember the most is the complete lack of compassion for most of them. Not all of them. There was one I remember called Christine, who was nice, but she was new. And I would doubt that if she stayed, that she didn't conform and become like the rest of them, who were bullies and control freaks. You wouldn't believe the stuff that happened to us in that ward. Later there was an inquiry about it, and I was called in to give evidence. And when I was asked why I didn't say anything at the time. And I said, "Are you kidding? You know, who's going to believe a nutter in a nut house?" That's how they got away with it, of course. And that's how they were still trying to get away with it. I don't know if anything happened to any of the staff in the way of criminal charges. But the ward was closed down, and in fact I believe the whole hospital was. You know, we're not talking about the 1800s here or the 1700s here. We're talking about the 1900s, the 1970s, that this happened. And I don't believe that things changed much, because in 1994 it happened to me again, because when I started dealing with all this, it became too much and I disassociated and I couldn't protect myself, and I was taken to hospital, and I this time was in a private clinic, in a nice big old sort of bit like Downton Abbey type building, and the food was restaurant quality food, and we all had our own rooms, but unfortunately the staff were just as ignorant and just as callous and uncaring. I I was forced into a ward meeting, which I didn't want to be in, where the patients and staff all sat around, and supposedly the staff were there to listen to what the patients had to say, generally about the ward and about the way things were run. And all of a sudden this man got up, he was diagnosed schizophrenic, and he started ranting on, and he came towards me. And nobody, not one member of staff, made any effort at all to prevent him from doing so, or to protect me. Well, I got up and I left, and I called John, and I told him what had happened, and he said, right, he's coming to get me. And I said, good, because I'm not staying here a moment longer. Of course, the staff then tried to persuade both him and me to stay. I later found out that in fact they tried to persuade John not to visit me at all. Whilst during the time that I was in there 10 days, because they didn't approve of our relationship. Talking about in 1994 here. That's only 18 years ago. And well, at least if it wasn't for that reason, they didn't really explain themselves. But they put me on a drug which they promised me faithfully was going to stop the physical problems I was having with the flashbacks. Of course, I was ill with what I have now, but they didn't take any notice of that. It didn't occur to them that I perhaps had a physical problem on top of everything else. Anyway, it was a lie, of course, and the drug I was put on started to give me a very frightening side effect, which they ignored whenever I told them about it. I told them about it within hours of having the first dose. I said, my chest feels bad and my heartbeat doesn't feel good at all. I said, in fact, it's really frightening. And they said, oh, it's just panic attacks. I thought, it's not fucking panic attacks. And anyway, to cut a long story short, that day that John got me out of there, I went to a GP, and he immediately stopped the drug because I was having a known side effect from it, and it could have caused my heart to stop. So I was right to feel the way that I was feeling. Anyhow, on the bloody leaflet that comes with it, it says in huge letters, well, in big emphasised letters, that if this particular thing happened, one must stop taking the drug immediately. And I was forced to take it for 10 days. Anyway, so I didn't really intend to speak about all this, but as I said, I tend to speak about whatever comes up, and this is what's come up. I think the point I'm trying to get across is that one can live with our traumas, carry them along with us in a bag, and they can weigh us down, they can cause us to not have good relationships with other people because they get in the way, because they're like little gremlins all over our bodies that maybe we're not aware of, but they come out and they cause their trouble. Or we can decide that we're going to deal with this shit now. I can't tell you that it's not frightening. I can't tell you that it's not painful. All I can tell you is that the journey is more than worth it. It's much better than living a half-life. Most of my life I had a half-life. It wasn't a life, it was just constantly running. Constantly just feeling terrible and not understanding why. And feeling that I was worthless and beneath everybody else. And this was, it's a wonder that I met John, who's a kind and decent and honourable man, and my friend Judy and my friend Dawn. And I mention them because they're the ones I've known the longest, and they know me from when I was, really not who I am now. And somehow or other they saw who I am now and not who I was then. I don't know, I don't understand. But of course I also made other friends who took advantage of me, who mistreated me, and because of my beliefs about myself, I never saw that they did. I just, they could hit me and I'd apologise and wonder what it was I'd done. Of course I'm not metaphoric, I'm being metaphorical here, they didn't actually hit me. I'll never forget the torture I went through, constantly worrying about, is it me? What have I done? And I don't do that anymore. If I catch myself doing it, I stop myself. And if I'm really that bothered, I'll ask the person, have I done something? Have I said something? And actually every time the answer's no. It's just me. Which is fine. It's not very often now. But, look at me, I'm sitting here and I'm doing this video. And I'm here alive to tell you that no matter what it is you've been through, you can get through it. But I also want to make it very clear that this is not an easy ride. It's not a case of having therapy for 6 months and that's the end of it. It isn't, not at all. It never becomes the end of it. But whatever it is, you can live with it, and you can live really well with it. The stuff I've shared in this video today, I feel it strongly when I relate it. And yet at the same time, it sounds like I'm talking about somebody else entirely. Because I was somebody else then, I wasn't who I am now. And I guess I feel very sad for the man that I used to be. But look where I've come. Look where I am now. This may be the first time you've ever seen my video, in which case you won't really know where I am now. But if you're interested, just explore more of the videos or go onto my blog, Knitman, and I think you'll begin to see that I have a very good life today, and then you can compare it to the homeless, so-called mental person that I used to be. All of which was over 30 years ago, and it's taken really a long time. But it can be had by anybody who really wants it. Bye.